Now, I'm pleased to introduce Lisa Cregan, Regional Director for the Mid-Atlantic at Morgan Stanley. Lisa is passionate about the work you all do and is here with us today to share her advice on how to own your future by shaping the now. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, Allison. I'm so happy to be here and can't wait until we're all able to be together again at the Breakers. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like to speak with you about today is the importance of the notion of climb, pause, lift, and how we can all own the future by shaping the now. Because whether you realize it or not, the financial services industry is on the verge of crisis. Your practices will lose their competitive edge. Your daughters, your nieces, your granddaughters face a bleaker economic future. The percentage of women in financial services already too low is at risk of dropping precipitously. People of color and Latinx stubbornly remain even more underrepresented than white women. If we don't reverse the course of these trends now, our future is at risk. So why do I say that? Especially when we're physically together at the Barron's conference, I am always struck by the massive ballroom teeming with smart, successful female financial advisors. With so many women together, it's easy to assume that anyone who puts their mind to it can be successful in our industry. And isn't that, after all, the beauty of our industry? Anyone who works hard can succeed, right? Each of you managed to become top producing financial advisors, didn't you? So what's stopping others from succeeding? Well, they must be weak or don't put in the hours like you did, so they shouldn't be in this business anyway, right? Well, if you believe that, then you have to also believe that white men are inherently smarter and more driven than women and people of color. That has to be the case, right? That has to be the only explanation for why 85% of financial advisors are white men. The rest of us obviously just aren't as good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I, for one, believe no such thing, and my career's worth of experiences bears this out. What I've seen over my 37 years is that there are societal, institutional, and privilege issues that have to be acknowledged and addressed before enough women and people of color can assume our rightful and necessary places at the table. What I've come to understand is that the only way to address these issues is if each of us own our futures by shaping our now. We need to climb, pause, lift with intentionality and focus, and we need to become allies of and influencers for change. Climb, pause, lift is my guiding mantra and a call to action. None of us got to where we are alone. We all climbed our respective ladders with the help of those who came before us. In turn, we all need to pause and with intention and focus, lift those who come behind us. I need this to be your mantra and your call to action too. If we don't recruit and develop diverse advisors, we're going to miss out on the fastest growing wealth demographic, women, people of color, and Latinx. And the firms and FA teams that shape their now by catching more than their share of talented, diverse financial advisors will own the future. The facts are undeniable. Today, women control 32% of the world's wealth, and every year that pool grows by $5 trillion. In fact, virtually all of the growth in middle-class income since 1979 is a result of the rise in women's work hours and wages. Over 40% of all mothers are either sole or primary breadwinners for their families, and 70% of couples are now dual earners. This is a wealth segment staring at us and waiting to be serviced better. But actually, the more interesting story for all of us in the room is around the possibilities involving race. We live in a world where it's projected that by 2045, the United States will become minority white, with more than 50% of the population represented by people of color and Latinx. And in the last 8 years, Black buying power has risen 114%, and on an annual basis on par with the GDP of the 15th largest economy in the world. Similarly, Latinx aggregate buying power has doubled in the last 10 years and is larger than the GDP of Australia. Growth is exploding in front of us, and we need to ensure we have the products, the services, and the talent to capture this opportunity. Now, I've had people ask me, is there any proof that women and people of color only want to work with someone who looks like them? No, there's no proof for that. But what I do know for certain is that clients get upset and advisors lose mandates if there isn't even a choice to work with someone who looks like them. Is there any proof that women and people of color want to work with someone who gets them, treats them with respect, doesn't stereotype them, takes the time to educate them and understand their goals? Yes, of course there is. People want to be understood, and it's only natural that it's easier to understand and connect with someone like yourself, someone who's walked in your shoes. But we've been hearing this diversity and different story for years, haven't we? The business case for diversity story. It's the right thing to do. It's our moral and ethical obligation story. Then why haven't we made more progress? Why is it that 865,000 women have left the workplace since the pandemic began? Why is it that this is a rate 4 times that of men exiting the workforce? Why is it that we're on the verge of losing 6 years of progress in adding women to the workforce in a mere 9 months? Well, I finally realized that the answer is simple. It's privilege. In this case, it's a culture that promotes a dad premium. The extra duties like homeschooling and childcare are falling on the women partner, and they're finding themselves in a time squeeze where they just can't do it all. We've all had this struggle for years, haven't we? But what I've now realized as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement is that there are many other types of privilege in our society as well. And I think sometimes when people hear that word privilege, it may feel like it's an accusation. They may feel guilty. They may push back and say, what privilege? But I think that they may not understand what privilege actually means. I've been a champion for women in diversity throughout my entire career. But until this year, I really didn't get the depth of the advantage and privilege that I've had and have. And it's humbling, to say the least. So here's one way to think about it. My shero, Billie Jean King, explains the notion of privilege by saying, if you've never had a Supreme Court case decide if you have the same rights as everyone else, you have privilege. Another way this really hit home for me was when I heard a colleague say, if you don't have to think about what it means to be white, then you have privilege. The discussions I've had about race over the past year have made me realize that privilege is experienced in so many more ways than I had previously understood. These conversations made me realize that my notion of climb, pause, lift has to become even more expansive than it was before. So as women in this industry, we've all experienced male privilege. Some experiences are blatant, others are more subtle. We've probably all been coached by our male peers who are genuinely trying to help us to succeed and tell us, you should be a little bit more feminine, but be less timid. You should be more outspoken, but don't be so aggressive. So what this tells us over and over again is that a man's style is still the norm, still the expected benchmark for behavior. I'm sure each of you have been invited to happy hours and golf events, and I have no doubt your managers felt that they've been very inclusive by asking you. But without pausing to truly understand you and the line of people who depend on you, male managers hold events that unintentionally exclude you because you have other commitments, like picking up your kids after school or caring for family members, or maybe you just don't play golf. I know I don't have to explain what it feels like to experience male privilege to a group of successful women advisors. But how many of you understand what it feels like to experience racial privilege or to experience sexual orientation privilege? Fewer of us, I'm sure. Have we been as intentional as we need to be to understand what other diverse groups feel when they enter a room full of people who don't look like them? To recognize the many ways someone may feel excluded from the conversation, or worse, cut down by micro inequities, assumptions, or stereotypes. This year has made me realize that I haven't been intentional enough. And it was only after hearing the stories my friends and colleagues told during the open and heartbreaking conversations that my firm encouraged that I realized that my notion of the lift hadn't gone far enough. The facts are that if each of us as individuals don't address these inequities, if our firms don't address privilege, if we aren't intentional, if we allow the status quo to reign, then our businesses, our firms, and our country will be the worst because of it. So what am I specifically asking you to do differently than you did before? It's simple. I need you to expand your notion of the lift. It's no longer enough to be fair, to not be racist. Not being something doesn't mean you are something. It's like being Switzerland and never taking a stance. Your lift has to include being an ally to those who need lifting. Your embrace of those who need lifting must become broader and more intentional than it was before. It requires all of us to be intentionally and willfully anti-racist, anti-sexual orientation biased, and anti-gender biased. It requires us to be able to see through our privilege and our stereotypes. And this type of change takes commitment, time, resources, and persistence. So how do you start? Change can only come as a result of a genuine understanding of the issue. So if you haven't already, have open and honest conversations with your diverse colleagues. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them to tell you their experiences. I think you're going to be really surprised by what you hear. I heard a heart-wrenching story from a Black colleague who was stopped by a policeman while driving to work. He was wearing a suit and driving his BMW. The policeman questioned him about why he was on the road in that part of town at 6 a.m. My friend tearfully described the fear he experienced, how careful he was to keep his hands on the wheel, how he tried several times to explain he was just going to work, but the officer just kept questioning him. It wasn't until he showed the officer his corporate ID that he was finally allowed to drive away. Was he stopped because he had a traffic violation? No, he wasn't. He was just somewhere the officer didn't think a Black man in a BMW should be. Have any of you ever had that happen? I'm guessing if you're white, you haven't. I know I haven't. I heard another story from a Black managing director at my firm, a mother of 2 sons. She told me how she nervously waits each time her son goes out for a run, how she won't let him wear a hoodie sweatshirt when he runs, and how she's so relieved when he gets home, she almost cries. She told me about how she had to comfort her other son, who was stopped and questioned by police while he was walking to his private school on Long Island with his white friends in their school uniforms. How do you explain to a young boy, without breaking his spirit, that just because of his skin color, he was singled out? When you hear these stories from people you work with, your friends, your colleagues, it's like a gut punch. And I have to be honest, I was stunned that things like this happened to people who I assumed had privilege because of how successful they are, because of where they live, or because of the cars they drive. I was hit between the eyes with the realization that Black doesn't carry any status or privilege. It didn't matter how successful they were. All that was seen was that they were Black. So my first ask is that if you haven't already, please initiate these conversations. You have to open yourself up and ask. And the warm embrace you receive is really going to surprise you. Your friends and colleagues will appreciate that you are trying to understand their experiences, and they'll start to see you as an ally. My next ask is that you pause and own your future by shaping your now, by being an intentional ally. Our industry has become a little more diverse than it was when we started our careers, but not meaningfully so, in my opinion. We all have to understand that this necessary change will never happen without each and every one of us being active allies and influencers. I'm asking you to have the courage to call out inequities when you see them. Don't ignore the ignorant, racist, homophobic, sexist comments you hear. Remember, behavior allowed isn't behavior endorsed, and your silent tolerance of these comments is an allyship. It's actually your tacit approval of them. Next, look at your teams. Do you have true diversity on your team? Are the equity partners diverse, or is the diversity limited to your support professionals? Are you creating career paths for diverse talent that lead them to becoming true revenue-sharing, equity-owning partners on your team? Are you having trouble finding diverse candidates for roles being filled? Well, you can't depend on or expect diverse talent to show up on your doorstep. There are whole swaths of talent that don't even think of our industry as a place for them. And why would they, with so few role models to inspire them? So you need to intentionally seek out these candidates by engaging with diverse communities and groups outside of your status quo. Make it a rule to interview at least one diverse candidate for every open role. Next, pick someone to mentor. Building a successful wealth management practice is a challenging, multi-year endeavor. Reach out to new diverse advisors and check in and offer support. They need it now more than ever. And this same intentionality, focus, and commitment has to come from our firms too. This can't all fall on our shoulders. Each and every company must continue to examine the unseen barriers to entry women and people of color face, gaining access to and being successful in our industry. And they must intentionally and purposefully dismantle them. And we as employees and shareholders have to hold our managers, our leaders, and our organizations accountable for driving progress and change. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that Morgan Stanley is doing its part to lead the way. In June, we unveiled commitment to diversity and inclusion as our 5th core value. To be part of Morgan Stanley is to commit to diversity and inclusion at the firm and in the communities in which we live and work. We recently created the Morgan Stanley Institute for Inclusion, which will be grounded in 3 core pillars: investing in stronger economic outcomes for underserved communities, strengthening these communities by focusing on racial inequities and long-term systemic disenfranchisement, and supporting and advising on the internal diversity and inclusion efforts at the firm. The Institute recently announced that we'll be providing 60 full 4-year scholarships at 3 historically Black colleges and universities. We've also intentionally modified our talent acquisition strategy, and we've created positions within wealth management that create pathways for diverse talent onto financial advisors' teams. As an industry, all firms need to step up like this and commit resources and people to address this issue of privilege. It exists at every level, and it's our obligation to break down the barriers to success that still exist in our society and in our industry. For this to happen, every firm, each and every one of us, and everyone in our offices individually and collectively needs to lift more intentionally. And this can be done. The percentage of diverse managers in my region has risen from 9% when I started to 40% now. And that all that was needed was intentionality, commitment, and focus. And it only took 7 years. So we can absolutely do this. This isn't just the right thing to do. Our future depends on it. And if we don't respond to this moment by transforming our industry and opening our good fortune to those who can and will make us better, then shame on us. Please join me, become an ally of and an influencer for change. The only way it'll ever happen is if we all make that commitment. We will own the future by shaping the now. Thank you, and back to you, Allison.
Thank you, Lisa. You've inspired us all.